I sat in a creaky white kitchen chair, same one I'd eaten birthday cake in as a kid, across from my parents and my twin brothers. The table was set like any other family dinner: roast chicken, garlic knots, steamed green beans. But the air? Thick. Too still. My fork hovered above my plate like it knew better. Across from me, my brothers Adrian and Mason were slouched in their seats with matching smug grins. My parents, Ruth and Gerald, shared a glance before Mom folded her hands neatly and said, "Harper, there's something important we need to discuss." My stomach dipped. She only used my full name when it wasn't going to be good. Dad cleared his throat. "We finalized the will." I blinked. "Okay." Adrian leaned back, crossing his arms like a man who had already won. "Long story short, everything's going to us." I actually laughed. Thought it was a joke. "What?" Mason tilted his head, voice way too casual. "Yeah, the house, the lakeside cabin, the investment account, everything." I looked at my mother. Surely she'd jump in. She always tried to mediate, soften the blows, but she nodded. Just once. "We believe this is what's best, sweetheart. You're self-sufficient." The boys, they're still finding their way. "Finding their way?" I repeated, stunned. Adrian is 32 and spends all day playing poker in his room. Mason just bought a drone to make TikToks. They haven't held jobs longer than a dog-sitting gig. Dad wouldn't look at me. He just kept sipping his water like he was trying to drown in it. And me? I was the one who'd paid their overdue rent more times than I could count. The one who helped my parents cover 3 winters of heating bills. Who sent grocery gift cards because they forgot to budget again. But I didn't mention that. Not yet. I stared at all 4 of them, feeling like a stranger at my own table. "So you're saying I get nothing?" Mom sighed. "Harper, don't make this about money." "It's not about money," I said, quieter now. "It's about being erased. About doing everything you asked no, didn't even ask, just expected, and now I'm not even worth a mention in your will." Adrian rolled his eyes. "No one made you do any of that stuff. You're the one who acted like some kind of hero. Guess it didn't come with the rewards you expected." Mason added, "Yeah, maybe if you weren't so uptight all the time, you'd be fun enough to actually be part of the family." I turned to my parents, waited for something, a scolding, a defense, anything, nothing, silence. And that silence broke something inside me. I set my fork down slowly. "If that's your decision," I said, standing, "then I've made mine too." Adrian smirked. "Oh yeah? What's that?" I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping sharply against the floor. "You don't get another dime, not from me. Not ever again." I walked toward the front door, leaving my coat behind. It wasn't cold outside. The chill was in that room, rooted in the way none of them stopped me. No wait, Harper. No apology. No regret. Just silence again. Back in my apartment, the air felt different. Not heavy. Not warm. Just quiet. I didn't even bother turning the lights on. I collapsed onto the couch and stared at the ceiling, trying to understand how I'd ended up here alone, drained, forgotten. I opened my banking app. Recurring payments stared back at me like scars. $1,000 a month to my parents, $300 share, $250 steer for Adrian and Mason's emergencies. They said I was stable, that I didn't need help. But I had never needed help. I had always been the help. No more. My finger hovered over the auto transfer settings. Then I clicked cancel. 1 by 1. A dull ding confirmed each deleted burden. It felt unreal, like jumping into water before checking how deep it is. My phone buzzed 5 minutes later. Mom. I let it ring. Then again, Dad. I stared at it until it stopped. Then a message from Mason. "You serious right now? You're cutting off your own family? Wow." Then Adrian, "Guess that will made you salty. Get over yourself." I put my phone face down, stared into the dark. For the first time in years, I felt a crack of something I hadn't known I was missing, peace. The next morning, I woke to 10 missed calls, all from home. I finally picked up on the 11th. Mom didn't say hello. "Harper, did you cancel our payment?" I sat up in bed. "Yeah, Mom, I did. But we rely on that for the electric bill." "The insurance, I know." I cut in. "I've been paying it." She paused. Then, the tone I knew all too well, cold cutting. "So now you're punishing us because of a will?" "No." I said, calm but unshaking. I'm just done pretending I'm part of something I clearly never belonged to. That's not fair, she snapped. We love you. No, I said again, voice firmer this time. You love what I do for you, not who I am. She went silent. And I surprisingly didn't feel guilty. I hung up before she could launch into the speech I'd heard 100 times. Family sacrifices, you owe us, you've changed. I had changed. That night, I made myself dinner for one and watched the city lights flicker through my window. No calls, no obligations, just me, just free. The silence in my apartment had a strange rhythm to it. It wasn't awkward or empty, it was still, steady, almost calming. For the first time in years, I wasn't juggling bills that didn't belong to me, or sending cash with a tight smile and an "it's no problem" text. And yet, underneath that peace, a quiet current of disbelief pulsed. Had I really done it? After all these years of carrying them, I had finally set the weight down. No more lifelines. No more last-minute transfers to bail them out. Just space to think, breathe, and exist without guilt. But space didn't last long. 3 days after the will dinner, I got a message that wasn't passive-aggressive or guilt-laced. It was something else entirely. A short, formal text from my mom, family meeting. Sunday, 6 p.m. Don't be late. I stared at it for a moment. A family meeting? Since when did they hold meetings like some corporate team trying to fix morale? A part of me wanted to delete the message and move on. But another part, the one that still remembered birthday parties on that same kitchen floor and movie nights with blankets draped over the couch, whispered that maybe this was a turning point. Maybe they wanted to understand. Maybe they were ready to see me. I went. The house looked the same from the outside tidy hedges, white shutters, a porch light that flickered like always. But stepping through the front door felt like walking onto a stage. Adrian was already there, arms crossed and foot tapping. Mason had his phone out, probably mid-scroll, pretending not to care. My dad stood near the back window, hands in his pockets. My mom sat on the couch like she'd been crying, but wanted to make sure she still looked good doing it. No one said anything right away. I stood there waiting until Mom finally broke the silence. Harper, this has gone far enough. I didn't respond. I just looked at her, letting her decide how she wanted to frame it. She continued, voice a little shakier now. You canceling the transfers, it put us in a really bad spot. Your dad's been trying to pick up extra hours, and I've been doing some online tutoring, but it's not enough. Dad still didn't look at me. He just kept staring at the trees outside like maybe the leaves would save him from this conversation. I shifted my weight. I understand that things are tight, but I'm not the reason for that. You had years to build stability, and instead, you leaned on me like I was your safety net. Mason finally looked up. You're acting like we were living off you. It wasn't that serious. I turned to him. You asked me for money to pay off your credit card, then again for that trip to Miami, then again because you accidentally bought a drone that was non-refundable. You've been using me like your personal bank app. Adrian smirked, leaning forward. So now you're keeping receipts? That's a little obsessive, don't you think? Receipts? I said, calm but sharp. No, it's called having boundaries. Something this family clearly doesn't understand. My mom looked exhausted now. Harper, honey, we've always trusted you to help because you're the strong one. You always landed on your feet. That's why we made the will decision. The boys, they need a little more help. I tilted my head slightly. And you never stopped to think that maybe I needed help too. Not money, just acknowledgement, respect, even the smallest hint that all I did mattered. Dad finally turned from the window. It did matter, but we can't rewrite the will now. That's done. Something about that made my stomach twist. Not just the finality of it, but how casually he said it. Like this was some logistical hiccup, not a betrayal. I nodded slowly. Okay, then I guess this meeting's over. Mom stood up suddenly. Don't walk out again. Please, you're still our daughter. I looked her in the eye, and for the first time, there was no anger left in me. Just clarity. You say I'm your daughter, but every decision you've made proves otherwise. You didn't just cut me out of the will. You cut me out of this family a long time ago. No one followed me out. Again. The next morning, my door wouldn't open. I twisted the handle, pushed, then pulled. Nothing. At first, I thought it was jammed, maybe a building issue. But then I noticed the foam gray, thick, sprayed into the edges where the door met the frame. Industrial foam, hardened and deliberate. Someone had sealed me in. Heart pounding, I rushed back inside, pulled up the hallway security footage, scanned through the previous night. And there it was. Mason, hoodie up, baseball cap down, canister in hand. He worked quickly, like someone who had done it before. Calm, focused, no hesitation. I felt sick, not because of the door, but because of what it meant. He wanted to punish me. I called the building manager, then the police. When the officer watched the footage, he didn't even blink. "Do you want to press charges?" I hesitated for only a moment. "Yes, I do." The fallout came fast. Mason got the call the next morning, and right on cue, my father called me voice tight, angry, but still laced with that weird mixture of pride and disbelief. "You really called the police on your own brother?" "He vandalized my apartment," I said evenly. He was upset. It was a prank. Industrial foam isn't a prank, it's sabotage. A pause. Then, bitterly, "How much is this going to cost to make it go away?" I almost laughed. "You don't get to buy your way out of this one." But he pushed. "How much?" $3,000. For the door repair, lock replacement, lost time at work, and mental stress. He exhaled hard. "You've changed." "No, I just finally learned what boundaries feel like." 2 days later, I got the transfer. No note, no apology, just the number and silence. Until it wasn't silent anymore. That's when the social media storm started. My mother, queen of selective storytelling, wrote a long emotional post about how her only daughter had turned her back on the family, cut them off in their time of need, and had even pressed charges against her own brother over a misunderstood incident. She painted herself and dad as aging, broken-hearted parents, Adrian and Mason as troubled but loving sons. Me? I was the cold one, the villain, the one who'd forgotten her roots. The comments came in like a flood. "Wow, some kids really forget who raised them. She must have been brainwashed by money. Family should be unconditional." I felt fury rise, but it wasn't hot. It was cold, clean, focused. They wanted this public? Fine. So I responded. I wrote my own post. No drama, just facts. Screenshots of money transfers over the last 8 years. Monthly totals, mortgage payments, tuition deposits, flight bookings, even the drone purchase. I shared the door footage censored Mason's face, but left just enough to make it clear what happened. And then I wrote, "You can call me selfish. That's fine. But don't confuse silence with guilt." I stayed quiet to protect their image. Now I'm protecting mine. If loving your family means being used, erased, and disrespected, then no, I don't love like that anymore. I didn't expect the ripple effect. A few distant relatives reached out. Some apologized for commenting without knowing. A few even admitted they had seen this pattern for years. One aunt sent me a simple message, "I'm proud of you." And that meant more than anything my parents had said in a decade. After my post went live, I didn't check the notifications for a while. I wasn't trying to win some popularity contest or clap back at my mother's melodramatic performance. I just wanted the truth out in the open. And once it was, I left it there, like setting down a weight that had grown roots in my spine. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful this time, it was charged. Not loud, but waiting like the sky just before a storm breaks loose. A day later, I got a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Aunt Claire, my dad's cousin. She'd always been the quiet one at family gatherings, never picking sides but always watching. Her message was short but heavy. "I never knew it was this bad. I'm sorry you went through that alone." Just those words, but I reread them 4 times. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were the first real acknowledgement I'd received from someone who didn't expect me to carry their weight. The next few days blurred by as I got back to living my life without waiting for their reactions. I went to work, hit the gym, cooked dinner for myself for no one else, and started cleaning out old files from my email. That's when I found a spreadsheet I'd created years ago labeled support log, like some part of me had known I'd need evidence someday. As I scrolled through it, the scope hit me all over again. Rent, tuition, utility bills, credit cards, vet bills for Mason's cat, plane tickets to bail Adrian out of Vegas row after row of numbers and explanations. I closed the file. Not because it hurt, but because I didn't need reminders anymore. I knew what I'd done. I knew who I had been to them. That weekend, I got another message. This time from a former neighbor, someone who had known my family since I was little. Saw your post. Your mom's telling people you're mentally unstable. She's saying you had a breakdown and that you're lashing out because of childhood trauma. I didn't even get mad. Not anymore. The desperation was obvious. When people lose control of you, they try to control how others see you. It was textbook. Still, I replied with a calm thank you and a request for screenshots, just in case. If my mother wanted to spin a story, fine. But this time I was building my own archive. I had no intention of rejoining their world, but I wasn't about to let them drag my name through the dirt without backup. A few nights later, I found myself on the balcony again, nursing a glass of wine and watching the city blink beneath me. I thought about what people say about grief, not just about death, but about loss in general. No one tells you how hard it hits when the people you cut off don't even try to fix things. That hurts more than the betrayal sometimes. You wait, even after everything, for a sign that they miss you, that they finally understand, that maybe they've grown. But sometimes that sign never comes, and you have to make peace with that. And strangely, I was. One evening, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a split second, my stomach clenched. But when I checked the camera, it wasn't anyone from my past. It was my neighbor Maria holding a box. She'd just gotten back from visiting her parents in New Mexico and brought me back some handmade soaps and a bracelet from a local artist. "You look like you needed cheering up last week," she said, smiling like it was the most natural thing. And just like that, I realized what real kindness looked like. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't come attached to guilt. It was quiet, thoughtful, and sincere. Later that night, I found myself scrolling through my photos. I didn't do it to feel nostalgic. I just wanted to see what parts of my life still felt real. Most of the old family pictures didn't sting anymore, but there was one that made my throat tighten, the only photo of my high school graduation, where I was standing with my diploma, off to the side while Adrian and Mason flanked my parents in the center. My mom's arm wrapped around Mason, Dad's hand on Adrian's shoulder, and me, barely in frame. That was the story of my place in the family before I even knew how to name it. Not hated, not abused, just invisible. And invisibility is a strange kind of pain. People don't rally for the invisible. They don't send condolences or start fundraisers or ask you how you're doing. They just forget you. So you learn to make noise. You learn to become undeniable, but being loud isn't the same as being heard. That night, I deleted every photo that didn't bring me peace. Not out of anger, just clarity. If I was rebuilding my life, I didn't need any debris. The following week brought something unexpected. A letter. An actual letter, hand-addressed, stamped, from my mother. I stared at the envelope like it was ticking. I almost threw it out, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside, the handwriting was familiar. Still careful, still trying to present perfection even when the words betrayed her. She said she was sorry I felt hurt. Not sorry for what they did, but sorry I felt that way. She talked about miscommunication, about how families sometimes say things they don't mean, and how she hoped one day we could move past this. Not once did she take accountability. Not once did she mention the will. Not once did she mention the foam at my door. She ended it with a single line, "Blood is thicker than pride." I folded the letter neatly and slid it back into the envelope. Then I lit a match and watched it burn in my sink. That line was meant to be clever, but it told me everything I needed to know. They still didn't see me. They still thought this was about stubbornness, not survival, that I had walked away because I was petty, not because I was finally saving myself. The next day, I blocked their numbers, all of them. I didn't do it in anger. I did it because I was finally choosing peace, choosing stillness, choosing me. I spent the weekend doing things I used to put off: painting, baking, wandering bookstores with no intention of buying anything, just existing, being. Reclaiming time I had spent budgeting around other people's chaos. On Sunday morning, I opened my window and stood with a mug of coffee in hand, watching the light pour into the street below. That's when I realized something that hit deeper than any insult ever could. I didn't miss them. Not the calls, not the messages, not even the drama. What I missed was the idea of family, the version I had made up in my head, the version where we all had each other's backs, where love didn't come with a price tag, where respect wasn't earned through sacrifice. That version never existed. And letting go of it was the most painful and the most liberating thing I had ever done. I was no longer mourning the loss of what was. I was celebrating the beginning of what could be. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel broken. I felt whole. Maybe the wound they left would always be there, but it didn't own me anymore. It was just a scar, a map of where I'd been, not a mark of who I was becoming, because I was becoming someone who didn't need permission to be happy, someone who didn't beg for validation, someone who could finally stand still in her own story, not as the supporting character, but as the author. The days that followed were quiet, but not the kind of quiet that creeps into your bones and leaves you cold. It was the good kind, the kind that let my thoughts stretch without hitting a wall, without anyone yelling my name from across a guilt-laced phone call or texting me for money with 3 exclamation marks and a fake sense of urgency. I was finally living in a space where I didn't have to apologize for being at peace. I woke up early most mornings, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. My mornings weren't filled with emergency transfers or passive-aggressive voicemails anymore. They were filled with things like oat milk coffee, soft music, and just sitting still without carrying anyone else's weight. It took me a while to realize I wasn't just cutting people off, I was detoxing. And detox doesn't just remove what's toxic. It shows you how much of yourself was wrapped up in someone else's mess. For a long time, I thought being the reliable one meant I was loved, that if I could just be good enough, they'd finally see me. But now I understood what it really meant. It meant I was convenient. Reliable doesn't always mean valued. Sometimes it just means available. And I was done being available for people who saw me as a resource instead of a person. I started spending more time outside. I visited museums I'd always meant to see but never had time for. I took long walks without checking my phone every 10 minutes. There was a small bookstore downtown with crooked shelves and a grumpy orange cat that slept near the window. I went there often. It became my safe space. The owner, a soft-spoken man named Eli, started setting aside books he thought I'd like. He never asked about my life, never pried. He just handed me paperbacks with gentle nods and recommendations written on post-its in looping handwriting. It was the first time in a long time someone gave me something without expecting anything in return. That quiet kind of care stayed with me. One night, as I read through one of Eli's recommendations, my phone lit up again. This time, it was an email. Subject line, urgent, property issue. I opened it, heart already racing even before I saw the sender. It was from my parents' lawyer. Apparently, after some recent financial instability, which, translated, meant losing the lifeline they'd been draining from me, they had been unable to maintain payments on the lakeside cabin. They were at risk of foreclosure. The lawyer stated plainly that if I was willing to assume ownership and resume the payments, the cabin could be transferred to me directly. I stared at the screen for a long time. That cabin was my favorite place when I was a kid. I'd spent summers there collecting stones and skipping them across the water, reading by the fireplace, roasting marshmallows with barely edible burnt crusts. And yet, as much as I loved it then, the idea of taking it now didn't feel like a gift. It felt like bait. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I drove to the cabin myself. It was a few hours away, and I needed the drive to think, to remember. When I got there, the place looked smaller than I remembered, older. The paint was chipped, the yard overgrown. The dock I once ran across barefoot now creaked with each step like it was complaining. But inside, everything was still where it used to be. The dusty bookshelf, the threadbare blue couch, the old wind chime Mom insisted we hang every year. I sat in silence for a while, watching the lake through the window, letting the memories come. They did, but not the way I expected. I didn't feel nostalgia. I felt clarity. This place had been peaceful because I had made it peaceful. I had been the one who cleaned, who cooked, who organized family weekends while everyone else treated it like their private hotel. I was the glue. And now that I was gone, the structure was falling apart. The cabin didn't need to be saved. It had already given me what I needed, a final confirmation that I wasn't walking away from a family. I was walking away from a role I was never meant to play forever. I drove back that night and responded to the email the next morning. Politely, professionally, no bitterness, just truth. I declined the offer, told them the cabin should reflect their choices, not mine. If they couldn't afford to keep it, they could let it go like they let me go. I didn't owe them rescue, not anymore. And as much as it may have felt like power to say no, what it really was peace. That decision echoed louder in my chest than any apology I never got. The next few weeks passed without a word from them. Maybe they got the message. Maybe they were too proud to respond. I didn't care. I had stopped waiting for their responses a long time ago. I used to think closure was a conversation, a final scene, some dramatic climax where everything is said, everyone cries, and then somehow we all walk away lighter. But closure doesn't always come wrapped in dialogue. Sometimes it's just a choice. To stop explaining, to stop chasing, to stop shrinking yourself so others feel more comfortable. A month after the email, I got a package at my door. No return address. Inside was a small wooden frame with a photo I'd never seen before. It was me, probably 7 or 8 years old, sitting on a tree swing, laughing so hard my eyes were shut. No one else was in the picture, just me. The handwriting on the back was unmistakably my mother's. "You were always enough. I'm sorry we didn't show you. I didn't cry, I thought I would, but I didn't." I just placed the photo gently on my bookshelf, between a novel about self-worth and a tiny ceramic owl my college roommate once gave me. I didn't call her. I didn't message. I just let the apology land where it belonged, not as a bridge back, but as a final chapter. I didn't need her to become a different person. I just needed to stop trying to be the daughter she never really saw. That night, I sat at my desk with the window open, letting the cool breeze wrap around me like a blanket. I made tea. I lit a candle. And I wrote something I hadn't dared to write in years. A list, not a to-do list, not a list of bills or responsibilities, just a list of things I wanted. For me, I wrote, take a solo trip to Portugal, start painting again, host a dinner for people who make me feel seen, learn to say no without explaining, learn to say yes without guilt. I wrote until the candle burned low. And when I finally put the pen down, I didn't feel tired, I felt alive. I used to think freedom was expensive, that it would cost me everything. But what I didn't realize was that the real cost was staying. Staying in places that drained me. Staying in roles that erased me. Staying where I was needed but never loved. I had already paid that price. And now I was finally done. Spring came quietly. I didn't even realize the season had changed until one morning I opened the window and felt air that wasn't sharp. It was soft, warm, like the city had exhaled. The trees were starting to show tiny green buds, the streets no longer swallowed by cold. I watched people walk their dogs and sip iced coffee and laugh with that particular kind of freedom that only appears when the world begins to thaw. I thought about how different I felt now, how even my footsteps sounded lighter. It's strange how grief doesn't always leave a hole. Sometimes it just clears space. And when the noise of disappointment finally fades, you hear your own voice for the first time. It doesn't shout or plead, it just says, "Now what?" I wasn't rushing to fill that space, but I was ready to move through it. One afternoon, I got a call from Aunt Josie, my dad's older sister. We hadn't spoken in years, not out of hostility, but because she had quietly removed herself from the family dynamic long before I even realized I needed to. Her name on my screen felt like a message from a life I had barely touched. I answered, unsure what to expect, but her voice was warm, direct. "Took a lot of courage to do what you did," she said without any small talk. "Your parents might not say it, but someone should." I blinked, stunned, then leaned against the wall like my body needed help holding the moment. She told me she'd been watching from the sidelines for years, that she saw the way I was treated, how the boys were always given grace, and I was handed expectations. She said she regretted not stepping in sooner. I didn't know what to say, so I said the truth. "Thank you. That means more than you know." We ended the call not with plans or promises, but something better: mutual understanding. No performance, no pretending, And in that moment, I understood something else. Not everyone who stays silent agrees with your pain. Some are just too hurt themselves to know how to speak up. That night, I cooked dinner for myself like I was expecting company. I lit candles, used the good dishes, played music I hadn't heard since college. I was done saving my best for occasions that never came. My life was the occasion. I had a habit of shrinking my joy so it wouldn't draw attention, as if being happy would offend someone. But now I was learning to take up space, not just physically, but emotionally, to allow myself the right to be proud, even when no one else clapped. I started documenting little wins. Not the big, Instagram-worthy achievements, but quiet victories. Saying no without guilt. Sleeping through the night without checking my phone. Going an entire week without thinking about who I used to be to them. Each moment added up like invisible threads weaving a version of me I hadn't met before. One Saturday, I met an old friend for lunch. Kiera had been one of the few people who stuck around through my unraveling. She'd never pushed, never prodded. She just showed up when I canceled plans, when I cried for no reason, when I ghosted texts for days. As we sipped coffee and traded updates, she looked at me differently. "You seem lighter," she said. "Like you're finally breathing." I smiled, not because she was right, but because I had felt it too. I wasn't waking up dreading the day anymore. I wasn't expecting a call to ruin my afternoon. I wasn't editing myself to fit into a version of daughterhood that never made room for me. The weight had shifted. And even though some of the scars were still tender, I no longer needed to touch them to remind myself they existed. Later that week, I received an email invitation to a family reunion. Not from my parents, but from a distant cousin organizing the event. She included everyone, even me. I stared at the invite for a long time, wondering if it was a trap or an olive branch. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't curious either. The thought of sitting at a table surrounded by people who had stayed silent during my hardest moments felt hollow. I didn't need a seat at that table anymore. I had my own now. One I built slowly, with intention, surrounded by people who didn't ask me to shrink. I didn't reply to the invitation. I didn't need to. Some choices are loud, others are just a quiet step in the opposite direction. That weekend, I booked a trip to Lisbon. No big announcement, no overthinking. Just a click. A decision made by the version of me that no longer asked permission to enjoy life. When I arrived, everything smelled like sun-baked stone and sea breeze. The kind of smell that makes you feel small in the best way. The streets were narrow and bright, the locals warm, the food rich with spices I couldn't pronounce, but loved instantly. I spent the first 2 days wandering without a map. I let myself get lost on purpose. I took photos without filters. I sat at outdoor cafes for hours, not because I was waiting for someone, but because I wasn't in a hurry to be anywhere else. One afternoon, I visited a bookstore hidden between 2 buildings, with ivy growing across the sign. The owner was an older woman who spoke little English, but her smile made me feel like I had been expected. She handed me a novel in Portuguese, and though I couldn't read a word of it, I bought it anyway. Something about holding a story I couldn't yet understand felt like a metaphor for this new season of life. You don't have to understand everything to start again. Back in my room that night, I sat by the window, the city glowing below like a living painting. I thought about the cabin, the dinners I used to fund, the birthdays I planned and wasn't thanked for. And I realized something I hadn't been able to say out loud before. I didn't resent them anymore. I pitied them. Because people who only know how to love through control will never understand what it means to be truly free. I had spent so much time trying to earn love from people who only knew how to trade it. But love isn't a transaction. It's not a monthly draft from your soul. It's a quiet, steady presence. It doesn't punish you for choosing yourself. It doesn't vanish when you stop being useful. The next morning, I walked through a small park near the river. I saw a little girl feeding pigeons with her grandmother. Her laughter filled the space like music, wild and without permission. I paused and watched, and for a moment, I felt like I was witnessing something sacred. Not because it was rare, but because it was simple. That's what I wanted. Not perfection, not applause. Just simplicity. A life that didn't revolve around fixing others or proving my worth. A life built slowly, intentionally, by hands that had once been tired but now felt steady. I sat on a bench and pulled out a notebook I'd been carrying. On the first page, I wrote one sentence. I was never hard to love. I was just surrounded by people who didn't know how. The ink bled slightly on the paper, and I liked it that way. Imperfect, real, honest, just like me. Coming home from Portugal felt different this time. I used to return from trips with a heaviness, knowing I'd walk back into old routines, old expectations, old wounds still waiting under the surface. But this time, there was no one to call, no one to ask what souvenirs I brought or remind me of the bills I'd forgotten to cover. Just me and my keys, the familiar click of my door, the quiet hum of a space that was finally only mine. I dropped my bags and stood in the entryway for a moment, breathing in the stillness like oxygen. My apartment wasn't perfect. The faucet still dripped in the bathroom, the paint near the window was peeling, and one of the hallway bulbs flickered if you looked at it wrong. But it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, that word meant something more than ownership. It meant peace. I unpacked slowly, letting each folded shirt, each trinket I'd brought home find its new place like puzzle pieces in a life that finally fit. The next morning, I walked to my favorite coffee shop, the one with the mismatched chairs and the barista who always remembered my name without asking. She smiled when she saw me and said, "Back from your soul searching?" And I grinned because maybe I was. Maybe I had spent years searching for pieces of myself in the wrong places, in family obligations, in forced gratitude, in being needed. But all along, what I needed most was permission to stop earning my place. I sat by the window with my coffee and pulled out my journal. No heavy thoughts, no long lists, just one line across the page. I don't have to prove anything anymore. That sentence lived in my chest like a heartbeat. It followed me into my days, gently rewriting how I moved through the world. I no longer responded to passive-aggressive emails from extended relatives forwarding my mother's posts. I no longer felt the sting of silence from people who used to treat me like the default fixer. I stopped explaining myself to people who weren't listening, and slowly, I noticed something incredible. When I stopped pouring into the wrong wells, I had more to give to the right ones. My friendships deepened, my creativity bloomed. I started painting again, not for approval, but because my hands itched to make color out of emotion. I joined a local community garden and found joy in dirt under my nails and the slow magic of watching something grow. I hosted dinners with mismatched chairs and candlelight and laughter that didn't come with conditions. People showed up not because they needed something, but because they wanted to. And that difference mattered more than I could explain. One evening in early summer, I received an unexpected message. It was from Lucas, a cousin I barely knew. He'd seen the online chaos, read both sides, and wanted to talk, not to accuse, not to mediate, but to understand. We met at a park downtown. He brought 2 coffees and no judgment. He listened more than he spoke. At the end of our conversation, he said something that stayed with me. Sometimes we inherit habits, not just houses. Some people pass down dysfunction like it's tradition, but you chose not to. That hit me harder than I expected, because for so long I thought I was the one left out. But the truth was, I stepped out. I stepped away from a cycle that demanded sacrifice but offered no safety. I stopped clinging to a version of family that only existed when I was useful. I chose not to carry what wasn't mine. The next day, I took a walk through the city, the sky wide and bright above me. I passed shops, street musicians, tourists, and families with sticky-fingered kids, and it hit me in waves how much life I had missed while waiting for someone to love me the way I deserved. I had wasted years explaining my worth to people who were never listening, but not anymore. Now I smiled at strangers without expecting anything. I said yes to invitations without guilt and no without apology. I started showing up to my own life without shrinking. One morning, a letter arrived in my mailbox, handwritten again, my mother. I opened it on my balcony, expecting another attempt at emotional leverage. But this one was different. No blame, no manipulation, just short, uneven lines written in rushed pen. I saw your post again. I read it more times than I want to admit. I didn't know we were hurting you. I thought you were fine because you never said you weren't. Maybe that's not fair. Maybe we should have asked. I don't expect you to forgive us, but I want you to know we were wrong. I sat with the letter for a while. It wasn't perfect. It didn't fix anything, But it was something, a flicker of truth after years of denial. I didn't feel the urge to respond right away. And maybe I never would. Some apologies are meant to be received, not returned. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconnection. Sometimes it's just letting go without bitterness. That day, I packed up the last few boxes of old family keepsakes I'd been meaning to sort through. I kept a few photos, the ones where I looked genuinely happy, not posed. A few childhood drawings. One letter. The rest I donated or tossed, not out of spite, but because not everything needs to be carried forward. That evening, I hosted dinner on the rooftop of my building. Friends gathered around a table filled with mismatched dishes and homemade pasta. Someone brought wine, someone else brought a portable speaker, and someone brought flowers from a corner stall. We laughed, told stories, spilled drinks, and stayed long after the sun had gone. And as I looked around at the people who chose me without conditions, I realized I had finally become my own home. Not the house I grew up in, not the role I played, but the place I returned to. A place built with boundaries, with truth, with love that didn't need to be earned. I had been disinherited by blood, but what I inherited instead was far more valuable. I inherited clarity, peace, freedom, and the ability to rewrite the story. I was no longer the daughter they overlooked. I was the woman I chose to become, one who stopped explaining herself, one who learned that love without respect is not love at all, one who knew that sometimes walking away is the most sacred form of staying true to yourself. And in that knowing, I found everything I'd been missing. I didn't get the cabin. I didn't get the house. I didn't get the bank accounts or the jewelry or the family heirlooms, but what I did get was better. I got to live. Fully, finally, without fear of being erased, without obligation to stay small. I didn't need their inheritance to build a future. I was my own legacy. So now, when people ask about my story, I don't tell them about betrayal or drama or inheritance. I tell them about the day I stopped asking people to see me and started seeing myself. I tell them about the mornings filled with silence and sunlight, about the painting I finally finished after 3 years, about the solo trip that healed more than therapy ever could, about the people who stayed, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And most of all, I tell them this: you don't owe anyone your peace just because they share your name. If they force you to earn love, it isn't love. And if they strip you of worth to feel powerful, walk away. You will find your strength in the leaving. And in that strength, you will build something so whole, so true, that no one can take it from you again. Not with a will, not with silence, not with guilt. You will rise. And you will never apologize for it. Story 2. When someone has been buried alive by a falsehood, I had no more space for terror. The quiet they select for themselves is the only thing that hurts them. And I, Abigail Callahan, had had enough of my silence. I entered a lawyer's office in downtown Vancouver on Monday morning, carrying a bulky briefcase and wearing an expression devoid of emotion. The workplace was compact, uncomplicated, and neat. Through the glass panes came the filtered sunlight, settling on the file I had brought. Each page contains a fragment of my life, living evidence that I never died the manner they said I did. Attorney Jacob Miles was the one who met me, a young man in his early 30s with thin-rimmed spectacles and well-groomed brown hair. I spread out the papers in my briefcase on the table. He only sat still, his eyes wide and without blinking. I pushed forward the U.S. passport that was frequently stamped from Vancouver and Seattle and stated, "This is my passport, Toronto. These are my pay stubs, rental agreements, tax returns, and Canadian residence card, all of which date from the same period. Officials in Oregon reported me dead." Jacob rapidly skimmed through a few pages before turning to face me. "Are you claiming that you were wrongfully pronounced dead?" My relatives exploited my nod to give my sister, Emily Callahan, all of my possessions. In addition to my own possessions, I also have some shares in the business I used to work for and my grandparents' inheritance money. He rubbed his forehead while leaning back in his chair. "This is unlike anything I've ever dealt with. I don't need you to be surprised," I said in an oddly composed tone. "Please assist me in taking back my identity and, if you can, in holding those responsible for this accountable." He nodded after taking a deep breath out. First, we'll submit a petition to have the death certificate revoked concurrently. I'll get in touch with the state authorities in Oregon and start getting ready to file a case for inheritance abuse and document fraud. However, he paused. It won't be a quick procedure. Months may pass. I steadied my gaze and glanced up at him. They are having a memorial service for me this weekend, so I don't have any months. They had already conducted a funeral when Jacob froze a monument. I am aware. I smiled sourly, but obviously one fictitious funeral wasn't sufficient. A second performance is what they desire. Larger, more widely known, and I'll be there to see them perform this time. I got a message from an unknown number the same evening. No greeting, no name, only one line. Abigail Callahan Memorial, Portland St. Luke Church on Sunday. My pulse was racing as I gazed at the message. My parents used to take annual family Christmas pictures at St. Luke, the church where I used to sing in the children's choir. They decided to keep the hoax going there. A hallowed space brimming with memories, now transformed into a platform for their fictitious sorrow. City lights were reflected on the glass within me as I stood near the window. Certainly there was no anger, just a chilly clarity. I had been thrown away, deleted, and replaced, but I would go back today. Not to say sorry, not to beg. I'd come back to get the truth. A freelance writer with experience covering intricate inheritance litigation was engaged by me. I provided her with all the documents, including the fraudulently transferred estate papers and the falsified death certificate. She pledged to conceal my identity until the appropriate time to reveal the truth. I simply said one thing: let me give you that chance. I also wore a long, fitted black coat that was understated yet sophisticated to fit the part I would play at the memorial, not as a disguise, the one from the forgotten who came back. I had no idea who would be there that day. Old acquaintances and relatives, individuals who ignored me without saying a word. However, I was certain of one thing: it was a day they would never forget. The reason for this is not the pre-written eulogies, but rather the fact that I would unexpectedly enter and reveal the reality that had been hidden for 3 years. The sky over Portland seemed strangely gloomy that morning, as though the city was lowering its head to something or someone. A little drizzle fell. Across the narrow street, I gazed at St. Luke Church, the site of my family's recollections of me from my early years. The lights in the cathedral were blazing. The entryway was lined with luxury vehicles. Individuals wearing elegant black clothing came in with expressions of pure sadness, but I understood that nobody really hurt behind that moral facade. After fastening the last button and pulling up the collar of my coat, I walked gently across the street. The door was partly open, but the service had already begun inside. Amazing Grace was sung by the choir, which I heard. The tragedy was perfectly framed by the angelic voices that reverberated throughout the hallowed area. The world was supposed to believe them. A man stood as the song came to a conclusion. My dad, Abigail. She had a complex personality. His voice was clear but slow as he started. She was difficult to understand at times. However, we adored her. We exerted every effort. With her eyes red and her handkerchief in hand, my mother sat below. As though memories were coming back to her, she nodded softly with every word he spoke. However, I was aware that this was merely a scene from a script that they had practiced. Okay. My hand touched the heavy wooden door. With a loud moan that reverberated throughout the cathedral, he took a deep breath and pulled the door open. Outside light streamed in like a chill wind through the crowded seats. The room was filled with murmurs. While some gazed, others turned. Then, in shock, one voice coughed, broke the quiet. "Is that Abigail? My God?" With every step I took, firm yet slow, the sound of my heels on the stone floor echoed like drum beats in their chests. I didn't glance at anyone, didn't need to say anything. My appearance alone was the solution to every question they had avoided for the previous 3 years. As they approached the middle aisle, the whole church fell into utter quiet. My mother stood quickly, lips trembling, eyes bulging, then slumped, her body limp in Aunt Margaret's arms. A beautiful faint, possibly prepared in her thoughts many times. At the pulpit, my father remained still, lips moving but formed, eyes wide. Nothing to say. With a harsh, dry thud, the microphone fell from his grasp and struck Emily and the sound system. With a glass of red wine in her hand, my sister stood close to the white flower arrangements. I could see it plainly as we looked at one another. Fear. Not an act, but a genuine dread. The wine spilled over her ivory silk dress because her hand was shaking so much. The cloth was covered in a scarlet stain that looked like blood. I entered the platform and stood just where they had bid farewell to a living person. I turned to see the faces of the audience that I never imagined seeing again. I didn't have to yell. I didn't have to cry. All I needed was the truth. I was told I had passed away. I started off in a firm, steady voice. As you can see, though, I'm still here. Real, living, and prepared. To be honest. Nobody said anything. A few sat still. Some phones started to ascend, blinking red recording lights in the illumination of the chapel. Excellent. Show the world. I opened the prepared file. My passport is this. These are my lease docs for Canada. These are my tax returns. My work agreements. These official records demonstrate that I never passed away. Regardless of the death certificate that was filed, I looked down at my dad, who was now seated quietly in the front pew with his eyes focused on the ground. I was removed from my family and wrongfully reported dead. And my sister received all of my possessions when I vanished. Everything that used to belong to me now, shared between the real estate firm and inheritance funds. I held up my hand as Emily attempted to speak. Don't. Not right now. You were allowed to talk for 3 years. I surveyed the church gathering. All eyes. Friends, family, and those who formerly professed to care. They couldn't look at me, so they bowed their heads. I added in a deeper voice. This isn't a memorial. It's a performance. Unfortunately for you, though, the curtain is going to fall and the audience has awakened today. I shut the folder. It was lighter in my chest. I didn't have to elaborate. I had returned, not just physically, but also with an indisputable truth. File in hand, I stood in the center of St. Luke's Church, my eyes like a sword slicing through the space. No more hymns, no more phony sniffles. Only the oppressive quiet of individuals pulled from a dream they believed they were in control of. I held up the documents while speaking in a clear, purposeful voice that spoke to everyone in the room. In Spain, there were 0 auto accidents. No brain damage, no highway crash, and most definitely no Abigail Callahan's death. It's been 3 years since I left North America. All of what you just heard is false. From the rear rows came gasps. A young woman's phone was raised, and I noticed that the camera light was blinking. Then another, and yet another. They couldn't erase the truth this time since it was being filmed. My father was still keeping his head down when I turned and pointed directly at him. The phony death certificate was signed by you. To legitimize a death that never occurred, you filed it to the state of Oregon. It's all part of a scheme to destroy me, to silence a daughter who dared to expose the shortcomings in this family. After recovering from her fictitious breakdown, my mother firmly grasped Aunt Margaret's hand. She stared at me like I was a ghost, her eyes wild, her face pallid. How about you? Gazing directly into my mother's eyes, I spoke. I spoke in a calm but forceful tone. You said nothing. You were aware of the reality. I did nothing wrong, as you knew. You allowed me to take the fall, though, and continued to spread the lie in order to keep Emily safe. I looked at my sister Emily, who used to sleep next to me on Christmas Eve, and once held my hand as I walked to school, standing like a statue right now. Her perfect makeup was starting to smudge with tears and sweat, and her fists were gripping the stained hem of her dress. You stole from the business, almost $60,000. Our parents knew, I knew, but you blamed me rather than take responsibility, and they decided to remove me as if I had never been there. Nobody answered. Nobody ventured. After inhaling deeply, I opened the second folder. Copies of the death certificate were inside, transfers of assets, Canadian government-issued identity verifications, carefully organized, signed, and stamped bank statements, and no conjecture. Proof. These will be sent to the Multnomah County Prosecutor's Office and the federal court. Persistent financial fraud, forgery, and asset seizure by taking advantage of a deceased person. And before you sell everything to repay it, Emily, you might be fortunate enough to keep a couple pairs of shoes. Behind me, there were gasps. This was whispered by Aunt Margaret. This isn't possible. I spun around and gave her a direct look. It's true, more than any event in this church's history. Then a man got to his feet. My father's younger brother, my Uncle Frank. He moved forward and gave me a startled look. We thought we really did, Abigail. Nobody called to see how I was doing. I interrupted him. Nobody sent a text. Nobody sent an email. Just one message. One. However, you all chose to remain silent, and you are complicit because of your silence. I nodded slightly and set the last folder on the pulpit. All I need is this. The rest I leave to the law. I stepped down the stairs, walking the center aisle. Every eye followed me. Some stunned, some averted, some still recording, following every step. Like a real-life documentary. When I pushed the church doors open, the afternoon light hit my face. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Because behind me, the curtain of lies had fallen. And I knew from that moment forward they could never put the play back together. The last light of the afternoon poured down the steps of St. Luke's Church as I walked outside. The breeze carried the scent of fresh grass and the musty wood from the old saint statue by the yard. But I felt nothing except the relief spreading through me light, as if a stone had been lifted from my chest after 3 crushing years. Behind me, the church door hadn't yet closed. I heard the movement of feet, wild murmurs, and someone weeping. Maybe my mother, maybe Emily. But for the first time in years, I didn't glance back. I didn't need to know what they thought. I didn't need to hear whatever tale they'd construct to excuse what they'd done, what needed to be said. I'd stated what needed to be demonstrated. I'd proven. The remainder now belongs to justice. The next day, I sat at Attorney Jacob Miles's office. The scars from my hefty suitcase were faint on my hand. He meticulously sorted each paper into designated folders, nodding as he scrutinized each seal and signature. "Everything's in order," he remarked quietly. "The petition to invalidate the death certificate has been presented to the state court, along with cases for document fraud, asset seizure, and false reporting." I nodded, saying nothing. I didn't feel triumphant now. It was made available. Jacob gave me a glance. You know, after what they've done, very few people have the guts to confront their entire family. I grinned a little. I didn't return to save the day. Simply put, I didn't want to be buried by a lie. The Oregon Department of Vital Records sent me a notification 2 weeks later. My identity had been entirely restored and the dead status revoked. Abigail Elise Callahan, a straightforward name, was at last restored to its proper position within the system. No longer marked as dead. I didn't anticipate how quickly the news traveled. On social media, the church video was shared in chunks that became viral under the title. In just 3 days, the lady who entered her own monument and revealed a family secret had over 1 million views. Others came out to me, some doubting me, some admiring me. A few journalists are asking for exclusive interviews. I turned them all down. I had no desire for stardom. All I wanted was serenity. At the start of the next month, the formal inquiry got underway. My mother, father, and Aunt Emily were called in by the Multnomah County Prosecutor's Office to be questioned. They blocked bank accounts. Transfers of property are examined. The law now controlled something they had previously believed would remain concealed forever. I was not there at the initial hearing. I had the right to, according to my lawyer, but I was too sick of stares. The cycle of false morality serves as the rationale. Rather, I went back to Vancouver, the city that came to my rescue when everything else failed. I went into the bookshop where I used to work and gave the owner, Miss S. Ruth, who had once preserved my very first handwritten application for a job, a hug. "You returned," she murmured, her eyes sparkling. "No," I said. "I never left." I moved into a new apartment that was quieter, smaller, and had a balcony that overlooked the river. Every morning, I brewed coffee, listened to soothing classical music, and watched the sun sparkle on the ocean. No more bad dreams, no more fantasies about the past pursuing you. I didn't go back to extend forgiveness. They didn't have to apologize so late. Forgiveness is a gift, after all. Furthermore, none of them merited it. I returned to assert my existence. And I felt really alive for the first time in years. Regaining one's identity isn't the only aspect of my narrative. It serves as a reminder that the truth is always important, even if you're buried deepest. The most crucial thing is to keep yourself from vanishing from your own existence in a world where a falsehood has the power to obliterate anyone. I didn't come back seeking praise or retribution. I returned to demonstrate that I am genuine and deserving of living my life as I see fit. How do you feel about Abigail's narrative and her decisions? Leave a comment below with your opinions. Remember to subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming and surprising family tales. My phone buzzed as I was about to brew coffee. A name I hadn't seen in a long time appeared on the screen. Our old Oregon neighbor, Miss S. Helen Dorsey. A beat skipped in my chest. The mere sight of that name evoked a wave of memories I had assumed had been buried for a long time. Like waves hitting a cliff, they crashed in. No context, no greeting. A brief message with an accompanying video. I just can't believe what I witnessed today, Abigail. My sincerest sympathies. I gave the video a tap. Although the coffee hasn't been prepared yet, my palms are already beginning to perspire. When the frame opened, I saw St. Mary's Church, which I used to go to every Christmas when I was a kid. Every stained glass window and candle appeared just as I had recalled. However, the mood was different, somber, honorable, relaxing. Slowly, the camera approached the altar. There stood my parents. My mom was dressed in a black lace gown. She had a white handkerchief softly wiping at her eye and an ancient pearl necklace around her neck. My father was reading quietly from a piece of paper next to her. His voice was clear yet tremulous. And there was a coffin behind them. Beside it was a big picture of myself with white wreaths around it. I went cold. Abigail has always been a girl with problems. As though it had erupted in my mind, my father's words reverberated from the phone. But we adored her no matter what. We exerted every effort. My hands were shaking so much that I almost dropped the phone when I sat up straight. It was disbelief, not tears, that caused my vision to blur. I watched the video again. There was no dream here. It was not staged. They had painfully real faces, but there was no grief in their eyes. Real tears did not fall. It's very unfortunate that Abigail passed away so quickly, my mother added. All we can do is hope she's at peace. I was breathing and living. Rent is still paid each month, working in Seattle at a little bookshop. Nevertheless, they arranged a funeral for me. I gazed at the footage. A shiver is running up my back. It couldn't be an error. I hadn't disappeared, remained accident-free. I hadn't gone through anything significant that would have made folks believe I was gone. This was deliberate. My gaze remained fixed on the screen even after I put the phone down. Pews were crammed together. Everybody wore black. I recognized folks from my youth. The previous gardener who taught me to play the piano. Uncle Roy, too, who hadn't left the state in more than 2 decades. Everyone thought I was dead. Nobody contacted to confirm. Nobody sent a message. No questions. I was more than simply removed from the family. I was buried alive. I slipped to the floor of the kitchen. Unsteady breath. I can still hear the organ music from the funeral film. I started viewing the video again and again as if I was looking for a gap in the system, a clue that this was all a misunderstanding. However, there was none. This was a well-written tale, thoughtful and methodical. One thing became evident at that moment, like sunlight coming through a window. This was no coincidence. This was a decision. I once thought that the one thing in the world that would never abandon you was family, that your parents would always be your pillar of support, regardless of how skeptic the world grew. But a single, ruthless, frigid phone call 3 years ago destroyed that notion. My father, Richard Callahan, was the CEO of Callahan and Hart Design, the architecture business my family had established in Portland, Maine, where I was working at the time. And Judith, my mother, took care of the money. As a project coordinator, I was diligent, taciturn, and never made any significant mistakes. Prior to the end of quarter balance sheet being a nightmare, everything appeared to be going smoothly. The $63,000 in the project operations money was no longer there. It was plenty to drive everyone into a panic, but not enough to destroy the business. I can very clearly recall the emergency meeting. My father's face was as heavy as stone when he held the bank statement. My mom remained silent, just gave me the impression that she already knew the solution. "Abigail," he murmured, his words heavy. "Do you have anything you need to tell us?" Stunned, I gazed at them. "What are you saying? I didn't make a mistake." His subsequent statement, however, was a dagger. "Other than your mother, no one else has access to the internal code for that account. Do you believe we are unaware of that?" My mouth fell open. "Hold on. Do you believe I stole that money?" Do you think I'm capable of doing that? Keep quiet. Nobody responded. From the corner of the room, there was a brief flash of avoidance. Emily, my younger sister by 4 years, was standing by the coffee maker with her arms folded and tapping a ceramic mug with her deep red nails. No assistance, no defense, just. Then I realized. The person who did it was Emily. She had just started working in the finance division. She had always been loved by my parents, thought she was lovely and intelligent, a marketing natural. However, I had seen the odd invoices from expensive stores in her drawer. Weekends spent at spas with wealthy friends, things her wages just could not pay for. I got up and faced my folks. Emily was the one. Both of you are aware of it. You simply don't want to acknowledge it. My mother lifted her head and gave me a direct glance for the first time. She spoke in a low, icy tone. Abigail, we've had enough of this. Do you not see? Is it preferable to have one damaged child than two? What I was hearing was unbelievable. They weren't only suspicious of me. To keep Emily safe, they decided to expel me. My bank account was blocked when I returned to my residence the next morning. My business email was locked. Messages requesting answers over accusations of embezzlement filled the voicemail. No formal declaration, no opportunity to clarify, simply gone. I tried contacting friends and coworkers. Some gave curt replies. The majority didn't reply. I was once close to them, and I messaged them. She answered in a single sentence. You ought to let this go. I turned into a ghost. No place, no voice. So I really vanished. I departed from Portland. Everything familiar? Using my middle name, Abby Hart, I relocated to Vancouver, Canada, where I found work in a little bookshop close to the train station. I was only a simple girl living in silence there. No social media, no communication with previous acquaintances. Even so, I made an effort to move on. On some evenings, the unsolved question kept my heart racing as I lay awake. Were they ever considering me? Feel bad about it. But now that I'd seen that video, I knew the answer. In addition to not regretting it, they staged a fictitious funeral to inform everyone that I had passed away. Not that they were unaware of my existence. They decided to cut me out of their life, to keep my sister safe. In order to divide the inheritance, must remove Abigail Callahan's name from everything that may embarrass them. They too believed that I would never return. They were mistaken. I made an effort to forget. It was behind me, I assured myself, that I had made it through my life's hardest fall. But you can't relax in life. My attempt to retrieve an old email account was the beginning of it all. When I lived in Portland, I utilized it to apply for jobs and be paid. To finish my application for permanent residence in Canada, I had to obtain a few old documents. I estimated that this straightforward task would take a few minutes. I entered the password and my username, but the system returned an error. The account has been deactivated. The owner of the account has passed away. I blinked. Go over the message one more. No. I gave it another go. I attempted to get it by using my previous phone number. Useless. Because of a formal death notification from the local authorities, the email was permanently erased. My heart was racing as I sat still in front of the TV. Perhaps that was an error, a technological glitch. I went to the website of the Oregon Department of Vital Records. I entered the search bar with my name. On April 5, 1994, Abigail Elise Callahan was born. Portland. Almost at once, a record appeared. Abigail Elise Callahan is her name. The death date was August 17, 2020, due to an automobile accident in Spain. Status verified. No more confirmation is necessary. Certificate of death. AUD 78 F6193 is the ID. I didn't breathe. Had never been in Europe before. Never submitted a visa application. I never purchased a ticket to Spain. Nevertheless, I passed away there. I selected Download Death Certificate. A PDF opened with ID numbers, seals, and the coroner's electronic signature attesting to my death from traumatic brain damage sustained in a crash on a highway close to Barcelona. Although that didn't sound right, who really needed the whole truth? As I read, my throat became dry. I was unable to blink at all. This was more than a simple miscommunication. It was a purposeful fiction. My death had been meticulously planned, complete with background information and even a precise location. Worse, they had deceived the authorities. I sprung from my seat. My hands are shaking. I took my old personal file out. Canadian identification, a U.S. passport, and a Vancouver health insurance card rental agreement. Pay stubs. Everything from 2020 until the present has distinct dates. Nothing indicated that I had ever traveled outside of North America, much less perished in Europe. I opened a map and focused on the road close to Barcelona, the location where my death was recorded, a little village beside the sea, less than 4,000 people, no American embassy, not a big hospital. It's the ideal location for staging. Like a broken clock hand, the question kept repeating in my head. This was done by whom? Why go that far? This was more than simply severing relations or kicking me out of the family. I wanted to be erased from the world. My mother's eyes when she stated, "An undamaged child is better than two," came back to me. I was doubtful no more. My folks, Emily, they orchestrated this to profit from my disappearance, as well as to remove me from their life. My heart fell out of my chest when I opened my laptop, entered my name, and logged into the Oregon State Property Management System. All of my assets, including my grandparents' trust money, life insurance, and a portion of the business, had been completely transferred to Emily Callahan. February 2021 is the date. 6 months after my passing. This treachery was more than simply personal. This was a huge transfer of assets, handled lawfully in my name. It was dark when I sat. Suddenly, it seemed colder than ever in my small flat. Light snow was falling down outside the window as Vancouver settled into winter. The cold in my chest, however, was far worse. The tale was used to bury me. I needed to get myself out now. I believed that nothing could surprise me since I had prepared myself for everything, after discovering how obviously I had been eliminated. I then launched Instagram. Not my. Long ago, that account was removed. Emily owned it. The algorithm unintentionally included one of her postings in my search after she had changed her profile from private to public. I was searching for information on Callahan. The reality hit me like an undertow with only one tap. I was astounded by her bio's opening statement. I am newlywed and surrounded by people who have always supported me. Photos from a grandiose wedding in Charleston, South Carolina, dominated Emily's Facebook. Long tables with white covers are bathed in golden sunlight. A tall display of crystal champagne. Arches of flowers in the shape of a heart between old trees. Lanterns of gold. A glistening mermaid dress. Bridesmaid outfits in blush tones, all beautifully presented. I was never invited to this dream. I went through each picture in the center. One picture really got to me. Richard, my father, was smiling and holding a microphone beside the groom. For the girl who never failed to make us proud, the caption read, I read it again and again, not for me. The one who took on extra jobs to pay for education, got up early to make coffee for my mom, and filled in at the office when there wasn't enough personnel. But for Emily, the person who lied, stole money, and continued to live as if I had never been there, I continued to scroll. The following image displayed a hand underneath which was a huge diamond wedding band. We are grateful to our cherished parents for providing the full cost of the wedding, including the beautiful house they recently moved into in Portland's most affluent area, Lake Oswego. I checked real estate ownership this time when I reopened the property records. My father had already registered that residence in my name. He promised to compensate me with a portion of the money once I finished my MBA. I wanted to earn it myself back then, therefore I refused to take it immediately. 9 months after my death certificate was produced, it was passed to Emily Callahan, the lawful owner of my heart. The connected bank accounts mentioned in the family inheritance declaration were examined by me. My name was gone once more. Emily Elise Callahan Hart, the only recipient of the Internal Scholarship Fund, was listed in its place, a brand new hyphenated name. Our grandparents gave us a joint investing account and even a life insurance policy that I was unaware of. My entire body was paralyzed as I sat there feeling numb. My mind started repeating one idea. They did more than simply take my position. They changed everything so that I didn't exist. I used to be the heir apparent. My grandparents once decided that I should keep the majority of the money intended for future generations. After my father retired, I was promised a position as a managing partner, but now Emily owned everything. Not a single picture of myself was shown, not a single reference, not even a wish that she were present. Beside my mother, grinning, was Aunt Margaret, who used to send me Christmas cards each year. Dean, one of my cousins, was clinking wine glasses. The entire family seemed content and pleased, as though I had never been a part of them. The moment I enlarged a picture of my father's speech was the one that broke my heart the most. A big screen behind him displayed events from the bride's life. I saw a single picture. I recognized it right away. It was a picture of myself when I was 8 years old, sitting in the garden in the backyard and smiling. However, it had been altered. Emily's face had taken the place of mine, done sloppily, yet believable enough to trick a stranger. I wasn't just left behind. My past, memories, possessions, and ancestry were all obliterated. Emily's name will now be borne by me. I realized then if I wanted my life back, I was unable to remain silent. I may have been buried in falsehoods by them. However, I will now use that quiet to bring the truth to light.